You're listening to Beyond the Measure, Episode 13. Listen as I, a young composer, and my wife, a young choir director, interview other music educators in order to gain insight into their own success in the classroom. We have a lot to learn, and we want you to learn with us. No matter your age, ensemble, or experience, this is the ideal podcast for music educators, composers, and students alike. So join us as we go beyond the measure. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Beyond the Measure. My name is Christian, and I am with my co-host, Kara. She's not here as I record this intro, but she is present in this episode. We are very excited for this week's guest. We have Mrs. Wendy Weeks, who is a choir director here in Abilene. She is the head choir director at Abilene High School, and we just talked to Ramel Derrick last week, and he is the assistant choir director at Abilene High School. So kind of cool, 2 weeks in a row, we got both choir directors at Abilene High School. Wendy has so many years of experience in the choir world. She is very well known all around, not just Abilene, but all of West Texas and across the state in general, I would bargain to say. Yeah, it's a really good conversation we have in this week's episode. A lot of really good information about structure in the classroom and how that sets the foundation for everything else that you do throughout the school year. So you don't want to miss this one. This is a really, really good episode. Kara and I actually just got back from our trip to TCDA as of recording this. It was a really good experience for us. We got to go to dinner with Wendy and a bunch of other educators from the Abilene area, and it was just a really good time for both of us to connect with them, for Kara to kind of start getting more oriented into the Abilene ISD family, and so it was just a really enjoyable experience for us overall. So yeah, just to give you a little bit of update on where we're at, we hope that you are having a good year so far wherever you're at, whenever you're listening to this, whether it's during the summer or during the school year. But yeah, just hang in there. We love you, and again, enjoy this week's episode with Mrs. Wendy Weeks. Thanks for being on the show with us.
Well, I'm just honored to be invited, so thank you.
Yeah. Kara, do you want to introduce our...
Okay, yes, we're talking to Wendy Weeks. She's the head director at Abilene High School, and I had the pleasure, and I talked about this last week, but I had the pleasure of student teaching there under her and Ramel Derrick, and I just had a great time, and I think of her as one of my mentors, and she's really helped me through my first year of teaching. So we are really glad to have you here.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. This is my first podcast appearance, so I'm very excited. Thank you guys for inviting me today.
Well, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. Well, we can just kind of get started kind of the way we normally do with all of our guests. If you could just tell us, how you came to do music and how you came to become a choir director, and you can go as in-depth or as general as you want. You can take your time if you want. How did it happen?
Well, I just grew up in a musical family. My father is a musician, and I grew up with music as being a part of our everyday life. My dad's a guitarist, and so as a little girl, we were always singing songs and playing guitar, and then I started playing my own guitar, which was actually a tennis racket, but I thought it was a guitar. Just singing and playing with him is pretty much how I started, just growing up loving being a part of music and getting involved in music at church from an early age. Also, I think I started taking dance when I was about 5 years old, and so even though it's not really producing music, it's definitely a music-related activity. So, responding to music, moving to music, being moved by music, I think then influences other musical decisions we make later on as we become more adept at making our own music. So music was just always a part. Either I was either singing, or I was playing piano, or I was dancing, or something. It was just a part of what we did in our family, and I was really blessed to have that sort of exposure as a young child. As I went to school, I had wonderful elementary music teachers here in Abilene Independent School District, had wonderful middle school choir directors and high school choir directors. And I loved singing. Singing is really what, brought me joy. But even at that, I didn't think that that's what I wanted to do with my life. That's what my dad did. My dad was a musician. I wanted to do something else. And so I was going to major in art history.
Oh.
Yeah. The only profession that might be a little less secure than being a musician. Let's be an art historian. So anyway, I was influenced by my high school choir director, who just would not let it go. She would say, I know that you think you've got it all figured out, but what about music? What about pursuing music? And I think, and I still think this to a certain extent, music is something that you do if you can't do anything else. You have to have a calling, you have to have a passion, and it has to be the thing that brings you joy and gives your life purpose. Otherwise, you probably should do something else, because it's a labor of love, and so I discovered that really probably was the direction I needed to go. So my senior year then decided to major in music, and I went to Abilene Christian University and got a fantastic music education there. And then, so that's kind of the education portion. My senior year of college, I was anxious about getting that first job, and I had needed to stay here in Abilene for family, and I actually got hired to be the choir director at Clack Middle School going into my first year of teaching. And I spent the summer cleaning out the library and picking music and decorating the classroom. And then about 2 weeks before school started, my high school choir director and mentor, Barbara Perkins, the one who had been lobbying for me to be a music teacher and not an art history major, called and said, I have an opening at the assistant position at Cooper High School, and would you be interested? So then 2 weeks before school started, I was transferred before I even taught a day at Clack Middle School.
Wow.
And I started teaching at Cooper High School. And so 28 years later, I have been teaching in AISD all of this time. I've taught everything from high school choir to kindergarten to middle school, and now back to secondary choral music again. And I've just been really fortunate to have lots of different experiences and lots of different opportunities. I never left a position because I was unhappy. I left a position because another opportunity came along. And so I've been really fortunate in that. So here I am. I think this will be my 28th year of teaching. I've kind of lost count, but I'm pretty sure this will be 28 years.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I was going to say, Wendy is kind of like a superstar in the Abilene area. I feel like anytime people are talking about choir-related things, at some point, Wendy Weeks' name gets brought up in the conversation.
Well, I'm not sure how to respond to that, but some would say it's because I've been around for so long. But I have been in this area a really long time as a student, and then now as a teacher, and so I hope that I have made a good impression along the way. So
yes.
I think so.
Well, okay, so I just know you and how organized you are, and I want to know, like, I didn't get to see the beginning of the school year.
Mm-hmm.
And since, school's coming up pretty soon, I
Right.
feel like it'd be a good conversation to have about like how do you prepare for like the first few weeks of school. So that's my big question.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I try to share this with student teachers. And I think the same philosophy applies whether you're teaching 5-year-olds or 15-year-olds. You've got to you need to have thought through your procedures and how you want the physical aspects of your classroom to function. And as the teacher, you've got to have thought through the infrastructure. Where are my risers? Where are the folder cabinets? Where are the kids going to put their bags when they come in? What's that flow of traffic going to look like? And try to troubleshoot as much of that as you can, and then build in procedures that teach those from the beginning of the year. We're in a really unique situation right now. We are, thank goodness, at the end of a huge renovation project in our building. And so we, at the end of last year, had to move out of our space into the foyer of the auditorium. And we still had, I think, maybe 8 weeks of school left. And so we still had to function. We still had performances. We still had things we had to get done. And so we had to think through that space and how it was going to function. And now getting ready to move back into our new space, some of the things that we did in the old room may not work anymore. And so just really spending a lot of time thinking through that. And troubleshooting that. And again, just because I teach high school kids doesn't mean that it's any less important. So there's that. Thinking about it as they come in the room and thinking about it in reverse as well, and not leave anything to chance, but here, step 1, we're going to do this. Step 2, we're going to do that. Just those basic things about how your classroom functions. Because the more structure that you have in place, the more that communicates to your students that you do have a plan, that you have an efficient way of doing things, and that indicates to the students that you want to make efficient use of the time, that you care about them, that you care about their safety, that you care about making the most use of the time you have together. And so I think that's really important. Before you pick any music, before you come up with creative icebreaker games and how we're going to get to know each other, I think you've got to have a really firm grip on the infrastructure of your classroom and what makes it work. For me, so it's those procedures like that. It's also a seating chart. I have a seating chart from day 1 at the beginning of the year. It's just alphabetical order because that helps me learn their names. That helps them learn their names. It gives them a place to go. And then I use that through the entire year. Then I move them around into sections and all of that. But just as many of those sorts of things as you can get in place from the beginning, I think, is crucial. So it's not a very exciting answer, but it's the kind of stuff that if you've done a good job, people won't notice that you have it. But if something is if something is chaotic or something is not working in the classroom, that's the first place I go. What are the procedures? What's and how much time have you spent communicating to those to your students so that they know what your expectations are?
So, what does that look like in the first, like, how do you teach those procedures to the students? And obviously it's not fun for them to know all the procedures they expect it the very first day. So do you do anything like to make it fun, maybe whenever you're in, especially in like a middle school?
Right. So you layer it in. So like what's the most important thing on the first day is that I think at the middle school level, they understand the difference between, especially for those 6th graders. Okay, I've been in elementary music class where we all come in a long line and we all sit in the same row of chairs, or we sit on the rug. Now I have a specific place to go, and it's not a chair at a desk. So to communicate, yes, you do have a defined area that you need to stay in here when you're in this classroom. So what worked for me is little numbered pieces of tape or some sort of numbered spots on the risers. And those numbered spots, and I would put them on the risers so that they automatically indicated windows. So, and you kind of have to know what your rosters are and know how many kids you have in your biggest class, and that's what determines the framework of this system that you set up. And then, once you get your roster and you put your kids in alphabetical order, I go ahead and assign them, like I said, a place on the risers just based on their alphabetical order. When they come to the door, hello, my name is Mrs. Weeks, and you are, and they show me their schedule, and I say, okay, Kara, you need to go stand on number 23. Put your backpack right here, and then go stand on number 23. And then each one that comes in the door, so I already know who they are, I've already assigned them a number, and they have a place to go. And so they don't have to worry about, I don't know anybody in here, or who am I going to sit by? That just sort of takes all of that anxiety away. And so that's probably what I would focus on the first day. And then leave enough time in reverse that you can say, okay, this row, go get your backpack, it's nearly time to go, and then they can leave, so that you're leaving in an orderly fashion. And then tomorrow, you're going to have to remind them of that number again, because they're not going to remember. But then you've built in that expectation that, yes, we come in, we have a certain place to go. We're going to put our backpack here, and we're going to go to that place. And then maybe once they're there, maybe they have a little all about me page or something that they can fill out while they're sitting, so they're not just looking around, because middle school kids, their default setting is not just to sit and be still. Their default setting is scrape from the ceiling. They're all over the place. High school kids, on the other hand, their default setting is almost,
I'm bored.
Like a sloth. They will just sit there and do nothing and be okay about it. So that would be my suggestion about starting it out in middle school. So it's essentially, I still do the same thing at the high school level too, but that is what has worked for me.
That reminds me, I had like a few pictures, kind of everything that you were describing. Like basically everything you're saying is you're setting up the foundation of how the entire class works.
Sure.
And I was kind of picturing like, when they start building a new building, the first thing they put in is all the big metal beams that are all around. I remember ACU was building a new dorm last year. It's done now. And we were walking by, and for a while there, it was just a bunch of square beams that were all just, there. But it's like, that's the most important part, because if you don't have that foundation, that structure there to begin with, the whole rest of the building's going to crumble later.
That's right.
Right. And so that's kind of what you're doing as far as how the classroom works. And then...
Well, here's the thing. You're going to be living in whatever situation you create for the whole year. So you might as well take the time and build the life you want to live rather than spend the rest of the year trying to undo the chaos. And it's really difficult. It's really difficult. And I don't mean that it has to be rigid. It isn't rigid at all. To the students coming in, this is just what we do.
Yeah.
Just a system.
And there's no guess. That's right. It's just a system, and it's structure, which is boundary, which says I care about you. And that's another way that you can show that, without saying, I care about you, but that communicates care. Because you have taken the time to think about how they're going to come in, and that's just the way it is. And that's just it. So
that's something really important. I've never really thought of it that way. When I think about how classrooms are run and everything, like especially as someone that's not a teacher, like I just think of it. It's like that's just for your sake, right? For making it easier, which it is, but that isn't a really important thing. Like, it's also for like communicating to the student, like the care you put in for them.
Well, if you're thinking about, I know the bell is about to ring, and when that bell rings, 65 sixth grade girls are going to walk through this door. Okay? So you've got to have a plan. And so, so that's key, because no one's going to learn anything unless you have that environment, and that you've got to set the stage for that to happen. It's not just going to happen.
And so and I'm kind of curious, even more specifically, like whenever you're thinking of those systems, when you're figuring out, well, what should the system be? Like, what should they do when they walk in, or what am I going to do? Like, what does your process look like when you're coming up with those? Do you just think about it and think, oh yeah, that sounds like good? Or are you making like a bunch of bullet point lists, or?
Well, I mean, at this point, I know what works.
Yeah.
Being in lots of different classrooms, again, and seeing what doesn't work. And really, that's the key to teaching. It's really the key to any success in life. But it's just one gigantic T-chart. And on one side, it says, well, that worked well. And on the other side, it says, what was I thinking? Okay? And so just gradually, I know what was I thinking column is far longer than the that worked well column. So you learn by messing up. I have learned so much more from making mistakes than from just getting it right on the first try. So again, I think seeing lots of different classrooms, there's lots of different ways for it to work. It has to be what's right for you, but there has to be a plan. It's the adage that says failure to plan is planning to fail. And it goes from the moment they set foot in your classroom, because that's what establishes that atmosphere, that positivity, or chaos. I mean, and those connections like that are made instantaneously within the first 5 minutes they're in your room. And you only get one chance to make that first impression. And so those first few days of school are crucial in establishing those connections and communicating. You can take this class period off because I've got this one. I'm in complete control. You don't have to worry. You just come in and just do what I need you to do. And I think sometimes that's really a signal that kids are looking for, and it puts them at ease. And again, that's easier for me now with 28 years of experience than it is with somebody who's just starting out. But it is the key to the success. I really do believe. And I could talk for a really long time about that and the procedures behind the procedures and all of that. And I mean, you've seen my room where I have my procedures and I have them posted. There's a procedure for everything. There's a procedure for coming in the room. There's a procedure for tardies. There's a procedure for going to the restroom. There's a procedure for dismissal. There's, and you were even with us during the times when we had an extra measure of procedures, because we had the sanitation protocol during the COVID times. And so I don't really know how to answer that question, except just, sometimes just put yourself in the position of the student and come to the door, and what makes sense to you, and where would it be easiest if I put my backpack and all of that stuff, and then just be able to communicate that and teach it and reteach it and reteach it, and before you're about to transition to a new part of the class, okay, we're about to dismiss. Let me remind you what we're going to do. First of all, I'm going to dismiss this row. They're going to get their backpacks and they're going to line up right here until the bell rings or whatever. But remind them that that's the way it is in your class. And you have to teach that just like you teach the key of 1 flat is key of F and do is in the first space. But you can't teach that until you teach everybody where to go and how to get there.
Yeah, that's like the main thing I'm really going to focus on this year, because I didn't do a good job with my classroom management. I think at the middle school level, I didn't really have to remind my high school kids a whole bunch. But that's something I'm really going to be focusing on this year.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and at a middle school, that's what everybody's focusing on the first week, because every teacher has a way that they want, that they want the kids to come in and behave. There's hallway expectations. There's cafeteria expectations. So they are all being bombarded with that. And so I think that's really important that everybody on campus, there's a plan that's been put in place by your administrators, and this is what they expect, and that trickles down. And it's really important that all the teachers on campus buy into that and really work on that at the beginning of the year. So since this year you're just going to be focusing on the middle school level, you may find that that's a whole lot easier because your entire day is going to be focused on that and not just, oh yeah, I'm teaching the middle schoolers, I've got to ramp it up a little bit. That's just going to be the way you do everything, and you'll begin to do it fluently without even having to think about it. That's my prediction.
Yeah.
I agree. It's like when they say, I hear them say this in regards to like business stuff, but it's like when you try to appeal to everybody, you appeal to nobody. And it's kind of the same as like basically saying when you have to divide your focus to a bunch of different types of people, it's harder to actually please any of them or have that structure. But now that you're going to be solely focusing on middle school, that's much better advantage you'll have compared to last year. So that's good.
Yeah. And I learned when I went to the middle school level, I was apprehensive because I had been at the elementary level for 12 years. And I thought, I don't want to come in here and do things that are too elementary-ish, but then you also got to think, but this is my classroom. This is my space. It's got to function in a way that works for me. And so you kind of find what works for you and what you're comfortable with. They say you're either a friend of order or a friend of chaos, and I've even been in meetings before where they have you put yourself, on this imagined continuum. Where are you? And, if friend of order, friend of chaos, I'm like in the parking lot on the friend of order side. That's how much that's what works for me. But not every teacher has a need for that high level of structure. I feel like what we do as choral directors, I think you've got to have a high level of structure, because what we're doing is so counter and so different to what the rest of their school day is. We don't have a defined area. We have a place to stand. Some kids don't understand that just because you're standing, that doesn't mean you can't just walk around the room. You've got a folder in your hand. That doesn't mean you can, you're in close proximity. You can't just whack somebody over the head with it. Just because you're standing right next to your friend doesn't mean you can talk to them. Your eyes need. So there's so many things that to us as people who have been in choirs for years, we just, that's just what we do. But you can't take any of that. You can't assume that they know any of that. And so my approach was always just assume that they don't know anything and teach them exactly how I want them to do it. And I really didn't get a whole lot of pushback on that. That's just what we do. It's just how we do it.
Just how we do it.
Yeah. So, yeah. And the other thing is watch lots of other teachers. Get feedback from other teachers. What do they do? I think we can learn so much when we just get out of our room and go look at other teachers and what they're doing. Core teachers, not just other choir directors, but other core teachers. And again, talk to the other teachers, the other fine arts teachers on your hallway. What do you do? What do you, and I think that there'll be a lot of support for you there as well.
That's why we're doing this podcast.
Oh yeah.
What do you do?
That's right.
That's basically the essential question.
I still do that. This many years down the road, I'm still like, gosh, what do you do? How do you do?
Yeah.
Okay, I could maybe take that little bit of that, but so keep learning.
Let us take a quick break real quick so I can tell you a little bit about this podcast's primary sponsor, which is Christian Fortner Music. That's right, my own music business. This is the primary platform that I use to sell my music, and you can find it at www.christianfortner, that's Fortner, music.com. Now, you may be thinking, oh, I don't know, this guy is a young composer. Does he really know what he's doing? Well, to be honest, none of us composers really know what we're doing, if we're being completely honest with ourselves. But if you want to kind of get an idea of what my music might be like and if it might be a good fit for your ensemble, you can actually get a free copy of music from me. That's right, a free piece of music. This isn't just a study score. This is full score and parts that you can use for your ensemble to perform completely for free. And you can do that by signing up for my mailing list. So if you go to my website, Christian Fortner, that's Fortner, music.com/mailings, you can sign up for my mailing list right there, and you'll get a link in your inbox where you can select a piece of music for either choir, string orchestra, or band. And I should also mention that the choir piece, it can be either an SAB, SA, or TB version. So for any of you out there that are looking for SAB, SA, TB, specific voicings like that, then this might be a good opportunity for you. So yeah, that's about it. Again, if that's something you'd be interested in, just check it out on my website. And now we can get back to the episode. Okay, so let's take everything we just talked about, like in terms of the structure, and you have these guidelines and how we do this, and now you're actually teaching the music, and obviously there are multiple layers that come to music. Where do you start? Because we just talked about the structure and the foundation of the classroom itself and how it runs, and so then what about the structure and the foundation of the actual music and how you go about teaching that to the students? What does that look like?
Well, let me just back up and say, although it's super important to communicate all those structures and all of that procedural kind of thing from the beginning, it's crucial that you sing on the first day. Those kids signed up to be in choir because they want to sing. And so I do think that that's important, that you figure out a way that you can sing a little something on the first day. And so I think this is not answering your question, but this is just something that I'm thinking about that I think is important. I think as choir directors or any sort of professional in music, we tend to be product driven from the beginning. And what we need to remember is that as humans, we are really more geared toward process, not product. And that these kids signed up to be in choir because just like me at age 7 or 8, singing is what brought me joy. Going outside and swinging in my swing set and singing Olivia Newton-John's I'm on top of the world looking down on creation, and the only explanation I can find at the top of my lungs brought my little 8-year-old spirit joy. So singing for the sake of singing has merit. And if we ever lose the connection, both as performer and as teacher, that is why our students come to us, is because they love to sing and because there is something inherently human about using your own voice to make a beautiful sound in concert with other people. And I don't mean formal concert, but it's something that we're all doing together. Singing is a social activity. And so we cannot be so process or so product driven, that we forget that. And so I try to have something built in as much as I can that's just singing for singing's sake. And so don't forget to sing. On the first day, even if it's just singing for singing's sake, singing something, a little quick round or a little quick something that you can teach them that they can can walk out of there singing. I think that's important. Now, from a pedagogical point of view, where do I start? Maybe on day 2 or day 3 after we've gotten some of the procedures kind of under our belt and we've been singing for the sake of singing and we're beginning to create some community and know each other's names, and Kara's sonic order is an ocean water, but Christian prefers a cherry lime slush, or whatever. Just things, low stakes kinds of ways that we can begin to communicate with each other. Then I start with the foundation, which for me is body alignment for singing, and breath, and then producing a free, healthy, supported sound. So, for us, we have the way that we do it, but there's a 5, my feet are shoulder width apart, my knees are soft, my sternum is lifted, my shoulders are relaxed and down, my chin is level with the floor. Just those 5 checkpoints. If we can kind of get, we'll talk about them individually. We'll explain why. We talk about why it's important for us to have our feet shoulder width apart, because if our feet are too close together, then we don't have a broad base of support, and show them, I'll let somebody come to the front of the room and push me over really easily if I'm standing with my feet together, as compared to if my feet are spread shoulder width apart, then I'm much more difficult to push over. We're just stronger. So those kinds of real world examples, so that they understand why. And then we go through that every day. And then it's free breathing, talking about breathing. I had a student teacher one time that taught me this really cool square breathing.
That was me.
And I found that works really, really well, just bringing their awareness to breathing. And then talking about how we take a breath. And so those kinds of things, you can't teach them all in one day, but that's where I start. And then just building on that every single day, reminding them of that every single day. And also in the midst of the rehearsal, if you see somebody who's not everybody check your posture. Please do a self-assessment of your posture. And then they're like, oh, well, then they feel super smart. I just performed a self-assessment of my posture. I mean, so things like that. That's where I start, is with that. And those are things that I don't care if they're 6th graders or if they're in college, those are still things that they need to be reminded of. And just producing that healthy sound, encouraging them to make sound. You're going to have kids who are afraid to make sounds, or you may have kids that are not making the same sound as everybody else. I mean, so you're just, those first few moments, you're just trying to take in all the sound and make those kinds of, as a teacher, assess, okay, who's maybe not matching pitch, what, if that's an issue that we're having, maybe some vocal exploration to see if they can find. So in other words, I don't voice them individually on the first day of school. That there is so much I can do that has nothing to do with whether they're a soprano or an alto, because I'm going to tell you they're all sopranos.
Yeah,
they are. So it's much better just to either do 1 2 1 2 1 2, or I've got them in alphabetical order, and so this half of the risers do part 1, this half of the risers do part 2. For boys, it's a little bit more complicated, but maybe not. It just that differs from year to year based on what kind of voice change, and that'll be different for you every year.
Yeah.
And whether or not you have your 6th graders separated by gender, or you have them in mixed classes. So, and even in my varsity choirs, they'd come in and they'd say, oh, I'm a second soprano. Okay, but today you're on this side of the riser, so I need you to sing this note or whatever. So I don't really do a whole lot of that until they really you got to gain some trust.
Yeah.
Before you ask them to sing.
Yeah, that's
even in a
very
small
true.
group. And so we do that from the beginning, but when the first times I assess them in small groups, it's rhythm, or it's something that's, again,
it's like less personal.
It's low stakes.
Yeah.
it's easy for me to stand in a group of 4 and chant or tap a rhythm than it would be for me to try to sing something. But you build in that expectation, and you build in that skill and that confidence and the trust from the beginning. But don't ask them to sing by themselves on the first day. I don't recommend that.
It was even hard. I remember the first day I had my 7th, 8th grade girls sing just like a round. And they were like all I had 40 girls,
right.
and they sounded like maybe 10 of them, because they were even just scared of the fact of just singing, even if there was like a whole bunch of people around them.
Of course. Because what if somebody standing next to them hears them?
Yeah. And they make fun of them.
Right. But what we have to understand, I mean, the thing that makes singing so special is also one of the things that provides a huge barrier for a lot of our young singers. And that is that our voices are just completely interconnected to who we are as people. Yeah. And so if you say something about my voice, then you've made a judgment of my character. Whereas if I play the flute and I play a note on the flute that isn't pretty, I can take that instrument and I can set it down, and that is separate from me. Yeah. And so, and I love talking with our instrumental colleagues about this all the time. In the arts, in music in particular, there's so many things that we do that are so much the same, but there's so many things that are completely and totally different. And so we never can lose sight of that. For me, I've been singing all my life. I stand up and sing by myself in front of a group of people, and it really doesn't bother me, but that's something that's a skill that I've acquired, or, I've been desensitized to that over the years. Some people may never get to that point, or may never have enough experience to where they get to that point. But we can't assume that just because it's not a big deal for us, that it's not a super huge deal for them. And again, it's really important for me as a teacher that I've created a classroom environment that is safe. It's safe for them to express what they think intellectually. It's safe for them to express themselves artistically. They're physically safe. I mean, just safety, in particular these days, there's just, it's a buzzword that, 10 years ago we would just take for granted. And we don't have that luxury anymore. Be very intentional about the way we communicate safety as teachers in our classrooms, in a way that's very different than it was even just a few short years ago. So I think that I think the way that you handle that is really important. So do definitely get them singing, but
not individually.
Not individually. And you're right. Even in a group of 40, they're sometimes really, really fearful. Low stakes. Yeah, that's the way to go with that.
I think I can remember the first time I ever walked into my high school's choir room. And I'd never been in choir before then. And I wasn't even walking in for choir. It was actually for, I was lucky enough to have an AP and a beginning music theory class at my high school. Wow. And so before I even joined choir, I started with the beginning music theory because I was already thinking, okay, I think I want to compose music. And so I went in, and I just remember being like so nervous just because it just felt like something completely new and different. And our choir room was really big too, so like it had a tall ceiling, and it was like, whoa, what is this? And it ended up being fine, throughout the class. But then I just fast forward to, I did join choir the next year, partially just from being in there in that safe atmosphere, and just the contrast from the first time I ever walked in to the last time I walked out my senior year, like. It truly was. It just felt like a home, Yes. And I think all of us have felt. Most of us, I shouldn't say all of us, but most people have been able to, even end up doing this because they felt that safety before. Now there are some people that that I've heard that didn't always feel that way, which is even more respectable for them to still go out and work to make that experience for others. But Yeah, that's just my personal anecdote.
And you know, I
remember.
had never really thought about the contrasts between our instrumental colleagues and what we do as singers, in particular in choir, until I had a young man who was in band, who then also, as a 7th grader, wanted to be a part of choir. And so, which I love. I still love. I love to have kids from other disciplines in my ensembles, and we work really hard at the school where I teach to make that possible, because we're all better when we have, we have singers in our instrumental ensembles and we have instrumentalists in our choirs. We're all better. And if our students are working on a music endeavor for 2 class periods a day instead of just 1, then that we're all better for that.
Yeah.
So but anyway, this young man, after our fall concert, we were having a day of reflection after, and he said singing in a choir concert is so much harder than playing in a band concert. And I was like, what do you mean? I mean, what? How is it harder to sing in a choir concert? And he said, well, when I'm performing in a band concert, first of all, I don't have to have it memorized.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my music.
Yeah.
And then I'm sitting in a chair, and then there's a music stand in front of me. And then there might be 7 or 8 other kids in front of me too.
And your instrument.
And my instrument. But he says, when you sing in a choir concert, you're just standing there. You don't have music. You don't have anything to hide behind.
Yeah.
You're just standing there singing from memory. And I thought, of course, but that never, ever clicked with me, that would be a much more vulnerable position to be in. And what we're asking these young singers to do, it is a vulnerable situation. And again, because that's what we're used to doing, we don't even think anything about it. Yeah. So then I learned, okay, I've really got to prepare them for this. Yeah. So then we really have to practice how it's going to feel and really talk through it. And what happens if you begin to feel uncertain, how you don't want to say, if you start to feel like you're going to pass out, because then of course they all will. But if you start to feel a little bit uncertain, what should I do? Or, sit down, or, it's okay if you need to sit down, or, so to talk through all those possibilities,
exactly.
So that is a positive experience.
And also when it comes to reading the music, going back to that beginning music theory class. So I talked about this on an earlier episode. I'd been in orchestra when I was younger in elementary and middle school. Then I had that break, and then I eventually joined choir. So I had never actually done sight reading before, like vocally. And so I was used to using an instrument to where, you can physically feel and see where the notes are happening. And I mean, I remember even like the first couple times singing just a major scale on solfege, I was like, what in the world? How am I supposed to do this? I mean, I can sing a scale, but like with the syllable, and then having to read the most simple things. And it was like, I remember for a good, probably like the first semester of that beginning music theory class with Francis Kathlina, and I remember going into my first sight reading test and just stumbling through it, and I finished, and he said, well, thank you, Christian. You sang all of the correct notes, even though you kind of stumbled on the syllable. Yeah. Saying the correct
there
notes.
You go.
But I just remember that was kind of like the one I was like, okay, I think I can kind of do this. But
because we have to perceive of the pitch in our head before we can reproduce it.
Yeah.
Whereas a pianist, if they see an F on the staff, they know where that is and they play it. They don't have to internalize that pitch in order to reproduce it. Now, that's not to say that they don't develop that skill and they can hear it before they play it. But in the very beginning stages, there is a whole other construct of things that have to occur mentally for a singer that instrumentalists don't experience. And so, that's another part of those beginning steps in music is building that library of sounds. So we have this hierarchy of sol fa fluency drills that we teach from the beginning of the year. And in the past 2 or 3 years, I've really kind of even re-examined my sequence, and I've sort of backtracked and added in a few in the early stages to help kids make those connections, because it doesn't make sense to start with a major scale. That's way, 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 way too much.
Yeah.
And so, we start with seconds, and we start with slurred seconds, and then we start with slurred thirds, and then we begin to introduce the idea of skips and those kinds of things. And then maybe you can conceive of the whole major scale. But it's building, the way I like to refer to it is we're building a library of sounds that the students can draw from. And of course, with music literacy, there's always this level at which I can perform music, and then there is another level at which I'm musically literate. And at the beginning, middle school, they're not musically literate hardly at all, just very, very, very limited range, but they can perform music even if they don't understand it. They couldn't sight read it, but they could perform it. And then, of course, the goal is that as you grow, that begins to level out. That right there, I could talk for 2 or 3 hours about just the pedagogy of all of that, and how you introduce all of that. And for me, that's the artistry of teaching, and knowing, how to introduce those concepts in such a way that kids that they're successful, and breaking it down for them. So that's the fun part for me.
Well, we can have a Wendy Weeks part 2.
Yes.
We can go on and talk more about it.
Yeah, it would probably put everyone to sleep as well. It's not very exciting, but it is to me.
Yeah, no, it's good. So I have been meaning to ask more questions on this podcast relating to composers, because I feel like I haven't done a very good job of that in the first few episodes. So like for me, but not just me, but a lot of people out there, I've kind of come to a point where, and I've mentioned this on some previous episodes, especially last week with Ramel. I've gone through college. I just kind of was writing music to just find my voice, so you can call it and everything. And now I'm at a point where I want to be able to start writing more music that is accessible for, choirs and orchestras or whatever, in the classroom, middle, high school. For someone that's in a position like me, what do you think is a good, I don't want to make this too broad of a question, but I don't know. What would you tell someone that's just now starting to kind of wanting to go in that direction? Like from a music teacher's perspective, what are the most important things that you think composers should be thinking about when beginning to write music for these different types of ensembles? I know it's really broad.
Well, I mean, and my brain is like right now, I have about 8 different directions my brain just went. So I'm trying to go, okay, which one of those do I really need to start with first? I think children know innately when something is of quality. In fact, that's Zoltan Kodály said that himself. Children know when something is quality. And and for my purposes now, children, I don't mean small children, I mean under the age of 18.
Yeah.
And so I think just because it is simpler, or just because it is accessible, doesn't mean that it's of lesser quality. And I think that kids can smell when it's not quality. So I think you've still got to start with a strong text. You've got to, especially with like that developing choir, that you're non-varsity, where non-varsity middle school, non-varsity high school, where maybe the melodic and rhythmic content is simpler, then you cannot give them just a trite text. So you've still got to find quality texts. And I've heard pieces before that are, maybe just from bare bones looking at the musical attributes of a piece are okay, but I would never take that to a 7th grade and 8th grade boys choir to sing that. Like, I'm not going to do that. Because the text is silly, or it's, I don't know. Not to say that some novelty pieces aren't okay, but I don't really think that's what you're talking about. So I still think it has to be text driven. It needs to be a good quality text. I think you need to be careful. Little things like, if I have the same text, and I come back to that same text later, then probably I should have the same harmonic treatment of it.
Yeah.
Like, if you had it in the A section and then it's going to return, later on at the end of the piece, then don't suddenly, or as the altos before had, mi so mi re do, then don't suddenly give them mi fa mi. Don't suddenly just throw something in there. Just it might work within the chord, but as a teacher, first of all, I'm probably going to change that before I pass it out to my kids, because it's not worth the extra hour and a half of rehearsal to teach that little different thing right there. So that's just not educationally sound, for me to spend that much time on that when I could be working more on textual inflection or dynamic contrast or something. So I think that's important to think about. I think, those are things that I see a lot. And also just knowing the ranges that you're writing for. And we... I work with the composer, so we have this conversation all the time. And, the matter of a half step can make a huge difference in terms of where it sits in the voice and passage for girls, same for boys. Boys that developmental age, they don't like to sing middle C. Like, they just don't. It's too high. You keep it below middle C. Now, if the tenors give the middle C and above, let the tenors have that. But your basses and baritones, because they don't know how to negotiate that break yet. And I mean, yes, you need to be working on teaching them how to negotiate that break, but maybe in your vocalizing, you're working on that, but maybe you don't want to give them a piece that just hangs out right there. So it's things like that. It's knowing the range of the voice that you're writing for. Remembering things like, all those treble voices in choirs, they're really all sopranos. So don't write them a bunch of A's and B's. Now if you're writing SSAA literature for maybe high school or college level choirs, go for it. You have that entire palette of color to work with. But again, I think knowing the voice, I think you can't know the voice enough. And even at that, I've been a part of a commission process many times in my career. And even there's been times where I'm like, okay, this may work for some second tenors in the world, but for my second tenors, they can't sing below a G. So can you rewrite this for us? So I think that's really, really key, is knowing the voice, knowing what they can do, having a good text, and then being smart, being skillful about the way you write, so that it's easy to teach and it's easy to learn. So it's not just different this time just for the sake of being different. Those are things that I look at in particular.
That's something that I've really tried to work on, and something that I like to do is kind of good practice for any of you composers listening is, it could be good to be thinking about all of that as you're writing, but sometimes also you don't want to get in the way of your creativity. So you can always just write the piece however you hear it, and then go back and then make it fit to what's going to be, because and eventually over time, I think it gets to a point where you do get familiar with all of those nuances and everything, to where it's easier to, from the very beginning, as you're writing it, start to finish,
Right.
it's already going to be more easily fitting in there. I mean, I was just talking to Allison King, the orchestra director at LD Bell High School, and she was looking at an arrangement I did, and she was giving me some feedback, but I was talking to her and I was like, man, even though I was only in orchestra for 4 years, elementary, middle school, that has still helped me so much when writing for strings, because even those few years, it's like it gave me so much just understanding of how that works. And so having those opportunities to kind of familiarize yourself with those different instruments and ensembles and everything, that makes a huge difference. Even for just a little while, it can go a long way.
Well, and I think too, I would think for a composer, especially someone who's wanting to get into more educational compositions, is read a bunch of them, sing through a bunch of them, and go, okay, if I were a teacher, how would I go about teaching this? And you'll begin to see what I'm talking about. Like, this is a great piece, except for this, and there's a lot of people that are really, really great at that. And those are the people those composers that, as teachers, we gravitate towards their stuff because we know that about them. But I would say read through a lot of that stuff, and I think there are some of those kinds of composers that you read through their stuff and it sort of becomes formulaic, and you're like, but the best of them are not that way at all. The best of them, it's like, this is a beautiful piece of music first, and then look at all it has to offer me as a teacher in the classroom, of what this would bring to my students musically, but also what else can we talk about, and what other connections can we draw from that piece of music. And so I would say to read the music of other people. Again, that way it's not affecting your voice as a composer, but you're just seeing other ways that other people have made it work. And so, there are a lot of composers, or a lot of teachers who are composers. I think a lot of them out of necessity, just to try to fill a need. And that's kind of how a lot of composers in that genre kind of got started, because, I needed a piece that did this, this, and this, and I can't find it. So I'm just going to write it myself. So reading some of those really good pieces, I think too, would kind of give you some clues about, like I said, this worked well, and what were they thinking, and then you begin to sort of see those things more quickly then, as you have more experience with that particular kind of literature.
It's like kind of what you were saying earlier about, as a teacher, you want to put yourself in the shoes of the student. It's like, well, me as a composer, I want to put myself in the shoes of the teacher, right?
Absolutely.
And then that kind of trickles down from there. But I'm really excited for, we're going to TCDA this week as of the time we're recording this, and I'm going to try to go to as many of the reading sessions as possible, because that's the best kind of place to kind of do that sort of thing.
I always love going to those sessions, and you're sitting in a room full of choir directors, and they all make the same mistake. Circle that. Okay, that probably should have been written that way. If all of these, and it's not necessarily even just it wasn't a sight reading issue. It's just because it just is a little bit contrived, or it just isn't what you expected, which, I mean, sometimes is okay if we don't go exactly where we're expected. But if I miss it and a room full of choir directors miss it, you know that your students are going to miss it. So I always circle those things, but that's always really interesting to sit in those sessions and hear those kinds of places emerge very quickly.
Cool.
I was gonna ask, so who are the composers that you like gravitate towards whenever you're picking out music?
Well, at the middle school level, Victor Johnson.
Love Victor Johnson.
Writes so well. And there's another example of a person who, a gifted musician, but then found himself in a position where he needed to write stuff for his kids to sing, and knew what worked for his kids and knew what would work for other kids. And I've told Victor this many times before, what I appreciate so much about him is he's one of those composers that it's just a beautiful piece of music, just on its own. But then when you begin to look at how skillfully it was crafted in terms of knowing the voice and the phrase length and, the way he works through keys that work together, and it's so brilliantly done that I really appreciate his work. Laura Farnell is another one who, again, just knows those voices so well, understands how to write accompaniments that generate energy. Difficult for middle schoolers to sing long, sustained lines, but if there is the right kind of accompaniment that keeps that energy going underneath, they're able to do infinitely more just because of using the other instruments in the ensemble to help with that energy. So she's another one that I really, really like.
We had the pleasure to. I was actually able to connect with her on Facebook, and she looked at one of my pieces, and oh man, it was so cool to just have her feedback from.
Yeah, she did talk a lot about like the piano accompaniment and like how important that a foundation that is. And I never really thought about that.
Yeah, no, it's very important. I mean, it's important that it's supportive.
Yeah,
it's also important that you don't write the piano accompaniment in the same range that the singers are singing in, especially for middle school, where it sometimes feels like you've got a hairdryer choir, so you want to get the accompaniment away from those areas where the kids are singing. It's got to be supportive enough to help them, but it can't cover them up. And then again, it has to contribute to the overall effect of the piece by generating energy or keeping the energy going, or moving the phrase, even if the choir is singing a long sustained pitch, that there's something happening in the accompaniment to help keep that energy going. Something I would say in particular about Victor and Laura, such kind people that are so willing to share and give feedback on anything. I mean, I've seen sometimes where somebody on our Choir Directors of Texas post, somebody will post a question, and I think that Laura is just sitting at home, just waiting for someone to noticed. And then she gives a very long and detailed explanation along with PDFs of this particular piece that I think might work for you. I mean, just so willing to help people out. And that's just the kind of people they are. So those are two in particular that I think are really, really good. There's so many. But again, to find that fusion of quality, but the understanding of the voice and how really to craft a piece, I think those are two. That's definitely a starting place. Those two, hard to go wrong with either of those. There are many others, and I think there's more and more people who are coming into that to that field, that are looking at writing music for middle school and high school, and doing it really, really well. Because not all of us can just take, the meat and potatoes of choral literature and pass it out to our choirs and have success, So, to have literature that bridges the gap and that, meets our students where they are and helps them to grow those skills so that maybe, at some point they will be able to perform those things. I just think that that's such a need. And I'm really pleased that, even in just the time that I've been teaching, choral repertoire has come so far, especially for those developing choirs. And
that's good.
So I think that's really contributed to a lot of success in our classrooms. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Sure.
again, I appreciate you guys seeing a need and trying to bring some content to people in your positions, aspiring educator, aspiring composers, and giving them a little bit of content along the way to help them. I think that's so great that y'all are doing that, and thank you for the invitation.
Of course.
Of course.
Of course. I'm sure we'll have to have you back one of these days.
Yes.
Yeah, I do want to hear about the your sequence of. I would have asked that, but it would have been
that
longer.
would need to be in a podcast for insomniacs. That would be the one. Put a special tag on that one. If you can't go to sleep, then maybe listen to that one.
No, that could be good though. We have wanted to every now and then. We kind of do want to do some more focused, specific topic episodes where you come in already knowing this is what we're talking about. So that might be a good one for the future. So
yeah, great. Well, I hope you guys have a great year. Good start to your year, and continued success with your podcast. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Wendy.